couple of years ago, I was at a conference in Las Vegas, and I met one of your neighbors, or at least somebody that's almost your neighbor, which is Des Walsh from Tweedheads. And he and I got to talking, and of course we ended up talking about our rural towns. I talked about my small town in Oklahoma, and Des told me about growing up rural in Australia. And as we talked about some similar stories, I realized that Des and I had more in common because we were rural than I necessarily had in common with the other Americans at the conference, because most of them didn't grow up rural. In the same way, I hope to think that you and I have some things in common based on our rural upbringing, our rural values, the way that we're raised. And much like you right now, we're dealing with an economic reality that's very much rural, which is that two-speed economy. For the first time in 30 years, we have a small oil boom going on. And so we have some towns that are being blessed with a lot of new economic activity, and other towns that are getting left behind. So as I look at that limited area that is returning to some prosperity, it raises the question of, do small towns and do rural communities really have a future? See, if we look just at what the media portrays for us and what we see covered in the news, rural is usually depicted as something that's not necessarily positive. In fact, rural gets tied to poverty a lot. If you do a search for videos about rural on the TED site, all the videos that mention rural talk about the developing world, as though rural is something we should leave behind as part of the natural progression from rural, which is kind of backwards in that thinking, to urban, which is the development pinnacle. And I don't agree with that viewpoint. I feel that rural communities have an important role to play in some key areas that we're going to need in our societies going forward. See, there's food and agriculture production. We're going to need to continue to feed the world, and most of that happens in rural areas. That's where the production is. Mining, natural resource production, oil and gas in my area, all of that needs to happen in rural areas because most of it is very impractical for urban areas. So once again, we'll need people living in rural areas in order to support that natural resource production. Also, we're going to need to conserve some areas. We'll have wilderness areas that we will have set aside for all of the history of our country now, and your country as well. And those wilderness areas require conservation, protection, and then people want to go and enjoy those wilderness areas. That involves recreation opportunities. In order for that recreation and amenities to exist, we need people living in rural communities to provide those services. So between food production, natural resource production, conservation and protection, I see an important role in the future for small rural communities. We will continue to exist. Now, not all of our communities will survive. Not every single community will be growing anytime soon. But we can all, no matter our size, no matter our status, we can all work on our prosperity, that quality of life measurement. How well are we doing? That's kind of the whole point of the innovations being talked about today. And prosperity for me comes back to small businesses. See, small businesses are drivers of prosperity. Researcher Charles Tolbert from Baylor University looked at the role that small businesses play in small communities. And what he found was that the more that a community had locally owned small businesses, then the higher their average income level was, and the less income inequality that he would find in that community, and the lower the poverty rates would be, the lower the crime rates would be, and in fact the higher healthcare rate measures would be. So people would be healthier in those communities with more locally owned small businesses. Now, Tolbert speculated that the reason for that is that small business owners act as an independent middle class. These are the people vested in the locality. We're the ones that act as stakeholders with a commitment to our community. And I say we because I'm a small business owner. And in fact, probably most of you are small business owners as well. There's a secret to that. Small town people are very entrepreneurial, but we also have advantages when we go into business. We know some economic realities that not everybody that's urban remembers. We know the economy will not always go up, no matter what is said. We expect and we plan for and we survive better through economic hard times. We are better prepared for natural and economic hard times and disasters. We know how to treat our neighbors. We treat people as our neighbors because we're used to everyone being our neighbor. But when we go online, then we take that neighborly attitude and we treat the people online as neighbors as well. We know how to build community within the group of people that are in our location, but we also know how to build community online as well. And it makes a big difference. Your own Jody Allen is a great example of someone that has built a wonderful business, stayed in her rural location, and never let go of the qualities, the rural qualities, that have made her successful. So every one of you that you can, start a successful business because that will help your community's prosperity. Now, some of you are not wanting to start a small business, and I understand. Not everybody should be a small business owner, but everyone can play a role. Everyone can support the businesses in your area. You can rally your community. You can start a set of community awards and award the Entrepreneur of the Year. Show your support for those local businesses. Make sure they understand that you care, that they invest in your community. The best way you can do that is to invest your dollars with them. Now, shop local gets said over and over until we kind of lose the meaning of shop local. But what I mean is, choose to spend your money with those locally owned businesses, even if it costs you a little more. You might save a little money by going online, or you might save a lot at the big city. But I'm telling you, when you choose to spend your dollars in your community, at your locally owned businesses, you're investing in those higher average income levels, in the lower poverty rates, in the better health care indicators, in the lower crime rates. You're investing in seeing the better quality of life in your community when you invest in shopping at your locally owned small businesses. So knowing that we have a role to play in the future gives us hope and gives us the inspiration to look at innovative ideas like are being talked about today. And then knowing that we can spend our money and show our support for our local businesses, that gives us the motivation to take action on it. Now, you've shown your commitment by coming here today, by investing your time in thinking about what you can do for your rural community. Make sure your actions match your thoughts, because it's up to you and it's up to me. Our actions determine the future of our rural communities.